Hello. We said last week that since the Han Dynasty, the format of Wu Yan, i.e., 5 characters per line, gradually became the dominant form in poetry. This form developed for a few hundred years, and most of the well-known pieces took this format. For example, if you still remember, we learned the 7-step poem, 七步诗, by Cao Zhi from the Sanguo, the Three Kingdom period. And it is in this Wu Yan format. After another couple of hundred years, towards the end of the Qing dynasty, roughly at the time when the Byzantine Empire took shape in the West, we saw a truly influential giant in Chinese poetry emerge. It was Tao Yuanming, widely seen as one of the very few greatest poets in the Chinese history. I know it's always very subjective and inaccurate if you try to rank all those great poets in terms of greatness. But if you have to, Tao Yuanming would surely be ranked top 5, alongside Li Bai and Du Fu. Tao Yuanming's greatness largely rested in 2 aspects. One is that he is always highly commended for his virtue. The time when Tao Yuanming lived was really very chaotic, with raging wars ongoing for decades, and emperor's court deeply corrupted. He was a totally honest and righteous person, refusing to be blended into the corrupted administrations, despite his ambition he had for the country. So he stuck with his principles, living a simple country life away from the hub, and never returning to the court, nor giving in to any material interest that was laid before him. This is actually one long-held tradition in the Chinese philosophy that when people lose faith in the society, they may choose to become a hermit, or maybe go deep into a mountain and lead a secluded life. But Tao Yuanming was slightly different in that he didn't go so far as becoming a hermit. Instead, he adopted a philosophy of seeking a secluded life from within. So even though he still physically lived in the town, or at least near a town, he was still able to resist all material temptations and consider himself a hermit in essence. This is very hard to do, so people respect him greatly for it and consider him one of the most virtuous men in history. His second great contribution was, of course, his poetry. Because of the ongoing situation, he wrote a lot of poems that reflected his profound disappointment in the society and deep pain for not being able to do much. But on the other hand, from the simple life he led, he could seek pleasure and peace in his own way to achieve certain balance between his ideal dream and the reality. All these poems significantly expanded the themes and styles of poetry as a whole and reached a high peak in terms of literature achievement. He pretty much created a new genre in poetry, i.e., the genre of description of countryside and its mixture with the poet's personal feelings, which had never been tried before, and which was later inherited by other great poets such as Wang Wei. Anyway, so much for the brief introduction of this poet Tao Yuanming. The take-home message really is that he is a very important figure, a great poet worth knowing. The poem we are going to learn today is titled Ying Jiu. Ying means to drink, and jiu is wine or liquor. Traditionally, drinking liquor has been a very important part of the Chinese culture. I guess it is also an important aspect in many other cultures across the world. People believed that it was a very stylish thing to do. By drinking liquor, it could show their class, their taste, and their grace. The act of drinking liquor may have many different kinds of connotations, and one of them is about blended with nature, so forming a harmony between oneself and the outside world. This connotation is what this poem is implying to. Of course, there are many other connotations, such as being sad, so the liquor is to make the drinkers drunk and forget about their pains, for example. And maybe we will learn some of these poems later. Tao Yuanming wrote a series of 20 poems titled Yingjiu, thoroughly expressing his idea on his life philosophy at the time. It is understood that most of the ideas embedded in these poems were conjured up while he was drinking. So, although some of these poems have no direct reference to drinking per se, we should still link them to a general, vague idea of a scene of the poet drinking while laying out his poems for us to see. The poem we are looking at today is such one without direct reference to drinking, and it's the most famous one of the series. It's number 5 of the 20. Let's read the poem together first. 饮酒，结庐在人境，而无车马喧。问君何能尔？心远地自偏。采菊东篱下，悠然见南山。山气日夕佳，飞鸟相与还。此中有真意，欲辨已忘言。We see this poem has 5 couplets. If you remember, last week the poem we learned, 长歌行, also has 5 couplets. This is really a coincidence. In fact, of the 20 Yingjiu poems Tao Yuanming wrote, some have 4 couplets, some have 5, and some 6 or 7 or 8 or 10. As I said before, at the time before the Tang Dynasty, the form of poetry was really free. Poets just put down lines in random number. 结 means to weave or to make in this instance. Lu means hut, i.e. house. So 结庐 means to make a house, which actually means to settle down and live. This is such a beautiful and poetic writing. Instead of saying building a house, Tao Yuanming said weaving a hut. 在 is at, 人 is human, 境 means place. So 人境 is where people gather and live together. This line is basically saying the poet himself is settling down where people gather, implying it's somewhere noisy and buoyant. But he then said, 而无车马喧. 而 is but, 无 is none. 车 is carriages, 马 is horses, and 喧 is noisy. So despite the fact that he lived in a town or a city or any place where there were lots of people around, there wasn't any noise coming from horses and carriages. You may ask why. Well, the poet asked it for you. 问 is to ask. 君, we have seen this word multiple times. It's a respected form of saying you. 何 is how. 能 is can. And 尔 means like this. So the poet pretended someone else was asking him, how can you be like this? And he answered straight away, very philosophically, 心远地自偏. 心 is heart, 远 is far, 地 is place, 自 is self, or naturally by itself. 偏 means remote. So Tao Yuanming explained that as long as you set your heart away from all this hubbub, wherever you are, it will be as if it's remote, so that you wouldn't notice the noise and wouldn't be annoyed by the reality. This is really stunning wisdom, isn't it? One doesn't need to be physically away to ignore what they want to ignore, as everything is really in your head. You just need to keep your heart away, keep your mind away, and you would be as if you were physically away. In the following 2 couplets, the poet tried to describe the scenes that he could enjoy once he set his heart at peace. It sounds extremely idyllic and attractive in Tao Yuanming's writing, although the scenes themselves may not be that special if we think about it, proving that it's really one's mood, one's mentality that makes things special. 采 is to pick, 菊 is 菊花, a flower, chrysanthemum, like this. In China, this flower is often associated with being graceful, proud, and detached. 东 is east, and li means fence. 下 is under. So the poet said he could pick up a chrysanthemum flower under the fence facing east. And what could he see there? He could see the southern mountain, Nanshan. 悠然 means calmly and leisurely. Here, the southern mountain could be the name of the actual mountain that he saw, or could be a vague reference to the idea of a mountain where hermit or even legendary immortals live. So the poet could leisurely pick up some flowers and look at the mountains, look at an ideal life that everybody might long for, but which Tao Yuanming himself could be living right then, anyhow, because he had set his heart in such a self-enjoyment mood. The next couplet, description of two more scenes. Shan is mountain, qi is air or weather or the scene, the general climate and effect related to the mountain. 日 is a day, 西 is evening, so 日西 means dusk. 家 is good. This line is saying the scenery in the mountain is really good at dusk. And then next, 飞鸟 is flying birds. 相遇 means pairing, accompanying, and jostling together. 还 is to return home. In the dusk, scenery is great. You can see flying birds going back home together. Very serene, full of nature. Beautiful, isn't it? Now, after all this presentation of his life, a life that appears ideal to him, Tao Yuanming turned to being philosophical again. He said, there is some real meaning, the real meaning of life, in all this that he just put down. 此 is this, 中 is in, 有 means there is, 真 is real, and 意 is meaning. But what is it exactly? Can he articulate it fully? No, he can't. 喻 is want to, 辨 is to distinguish, to recognize, 以 is already, 忘 is forget, and 言 is words or language. So while he wanted to recognize, to find the real meaning of life, he just can't pick the right words. He was just not able to do so. So he attributed his joy to some unnameable factors, which was very subtle and left lots of aftertaste. But to us readers, it's actually very clear. Tao Yuanming was really hinting that the joy you get from this kind of life cannot be put down onto a piece of paper. You have to come and experience it yourself. You have to set your mind away from the annoyance of daily chores and seek calmness from within, and then you will experience the joy the poet was experiencing, and you will realize this is the real meaning of life. It's a very powerful statement, but totally convincing from the context. It's also such a masterful way of writing to turn seemingly rather insignificant scenes into something much, much more special and appealing. That's all for today. Thank you.